Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz. As everybody can see, we've got the great Jim Valliant back with us today. I don't need to go through all the introductory stuff. You know who he is. And he's here today to talk to us about objectivism, the objectivist movement, and the future of the philosophy. Jim, welcome back, as always.
It is always great to be here, my brother. Always great to be here. You have one of the most trenchant, serious political analysis podcasts and philosophical analysis podcasts that exists out there. I have to
Well,
say,
thank you very much.
just an honor to be here, my friend.
Thank you so much. So Ayn Rand was once asked to sum up objectivism, I think, while standing on one foot. So I'm going to ask Jim Valliant, can you sum up objectivism while sitting in a chair in front of your two books?
Well, it was at a publishers meeting at Atlas Shrugged. Bennett Cerf and the folks at the biggest publishing house in New York City asked her if she could summarize her philosophy while standing on one foot. She boasted, "I did so as follows." So there you can imagine Ayn Rand standing on one foot in front of Bennett Cerf and the folks at Random House as she explains metaphysics, objective reality, epistemology, reason, ethics, rational egoism or selfishness, politics, freedom, individual rights, and it is a radical message. It can't, however pithy one can summarize it, and one can summarize it in terms of essentials. And Ayn Rand would actually even put a hierarchy on those. She would explain later in The Objectivist, I'm not fundamentally an advocate of capitalism, although she was the most consistent advocate of capitalism over time. She's more fundamentally an advocate of egoism. And she's not fundamentally an advocate of egoism. She's more fundamentally an advocate of reason. Accept reason and all the rest follows. Now, that's a very radical proposition right there. To really grasp it, as easy as that was to say, and Ayn Rand was brilliant at being able to stand on one foot, and her ability to communicate her ideas to a general audience is breathtaking, frankly. Her success, I think, shows that. But as easy as it is for her to articulate in some ways, it is really, really hard for other people to understand. And why? Because it's not as though we come on this situation tabula rasa, if I can use the term. We are inundated with all kinds of counter ideas from the moment we are toddlers, and whether either our parents are giving it to us, or our teachers, or our clergy people, or our peers, or the magazines and the internet and everything else. Our culture inundates and trains minds against objectivism in very, very powerful ways. I myself, you did a whole thing on me in the last interview. As a young child, I was a Christian, and that had a deep impact on my ways of thinking, my ways of feeling. My whole psychoepistemology and psychology, as we objectivists would put it, was affected by it. And so for me to undo that, even when I read The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, okay, I see the general thrust of this, but I have a lot of questions and I don't think I understand it fully. And that's why self-conscious study of philosophy and the history of philosophy was, for me, an important thing to do. I had to go to NYU, study philosophy from academic philosophers who were not objectivists, in order for me to get a sense of what philosophers really did say and what Ayn Rand's revolution was all about. I had to study the history of philosophy from Leonard Peikoff and get the objectivist answer to the great philosophers of the ages. And it was only then that I began to get a real awareness of it. Now, for the ordinary person on the street, if you start out and you say, okay, selfishness is a virtue, woo, they're all over this huge loop, and they're going to have a hard time. It's going to be hours, if not days, of explanation just for them to grasp at a superficial level that one point. When I go into epistemology and I talk about the revolution that Ayn Rand wrought in epistemology, what an answer it is to modern philosophy, the Hume, Kant, Hegel crowd, and wow. But unfortunately, the premises of modern philosophy have sunk in with intellectuals. The premises of religion have sunk in with a lot of the masses. And it's all part of our culture. And that's the vast inertia. Compared to communism and socialism, coming about in the late 19th century and then dominating the 20th century, Objectivism has a much, much harder task. The Marxists were playing into dominant cultural
Right.
trends. We are fighting gravity, in effect,
Yeah.
challenging, as Ayn Rand immodestly said, 2,000 years of intellectual tradition. Literally, she's asking us to put our head to scratch everything that philosophy has done in the last 2,000 years and start back with Aristotle and start from scratch again with philosophy, basically from Aristotle.
Yeah.
And that's quite a revolution.
So you mentioned two things. One, how we're inundated with, all this counter narrative philosophy from the time we're toddlers. And you also mentioned Leonard Peikoff. It reminds me of reading of a discussion he once had with Ayn Rand, where she said, "I'm just honest. That's how I come to my conclusions." And he said, "No, no, you're not just honest. I'm honest. I didn't come up with this philosophy."
He is the
Yeah.
embodiment of intellectual honesty, as you know.
Yeah.
That's my view of him. And
Yeah.
Ayn Rand really thought like that. She was a genius. She did not appreciate her unique, if any, people say she had this wild view of herself. If anything, she did not appreciate her unique talents. Oftentimes, she did not appreciate how radical her views were. On the other hand, when Leonard Peikoff first read Atlas Shrugged in 1957, he said, "That's it, the culture's cooked. It's all over. There's nothing left for me to do to persuade. Atlas Shrugged will convince the world, and that's it." Now, Ayn Rand came down on him hard, saying, no, no, no. It's much earlier than you think. The world is going to, the right's going to attack me. The left's going to attack me. Get ready. Get ready for the onslaught. You're going to be surprised, Leonard. And I can't believe it. Of course, he was surprised, and in a bad way, by what then proceeds. Now, though it is true, Ayn Rand did not appreciate her own unique intellectual gifts. And oftentimes, she didn't even appreciate how she'd layered her work. Leonard Peikoff would come back, from classes, getting his PhD in philosophy with some question. And Ayn Rand would say, "Well, didn't you get my answer in Atlas Shrugged?" And Leonard would say, "No, I've read Atlas Shrugged multiple times and I still don't have the answer." And she'd say, "No, no, no, look right here." And she'd point out a passage which he'd read and understood at one, maybe even two different levels. And then suddenly reading it in that light, oh, of course you have, you answered that directly, Ayn. And so Ayn Rand also sometimes didn't appreciate how difficult, though, it was for other people to grasp, especially if they've been polluted by other ideas, some of her ideas. And she was putting it in there. Now, in another sense, I want to defend Ayn Rand for saying it's just honesty, because although she was a genius and could get to fundamentals like few minds in history could ever get to fundamentals, nonetheless, in her mind, it was simply a question of honesty. She would introspect, her theory of concepts. She's in the 1940s, she's talking with a Thomist philosopher, and she's explaining, how she's an Aristotelian, but a secular one. And he was laying out some of the problems of modern philosophy. And he asked, "Well, what's your answer to the problem of universals? What's your theory of concepts?" And she takes a few minutes to introspect, look in her own mind. See, it's her own work as a novelist that informed her about human psychology.
Can I answer it? Can I see if I can get it? Get what her answer was? Measurement omission.
That's what she did. She looked in and she said, "That's what I do. I find a co-measurable thing by omitting the measurements. And the function of that is unit economy." And she could, in that moment, basically synopsize her theory of concepts right then. Now, get this, though. She had written out some stuff, but it took Leonard Peikoff and Alan Godhealth, two young PhDs in philosophy, to read that and say, Miss Rand, you really should publish this. This is the answer to Locke and Hume and Kant, and you've answered the question of the ages that was so vexing to them, that would have cut through so much of their BS. And she had to be persuaded to do it, and she did. She gussied it up and published her Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology,
which is one of my might be my favorite.
It's so radical.
Yeah.
It's so radical. We're doing the history of philosophy for the Ayn Rand Center UK on Sundays tomorrow.
Nice plug.
Thank you. But we're going to continue with Kant. But one of the questions I asked the class was, imagine, if you will, someone coming along and arguing the primacy of existence, or saying that rather than being the disqualifying feature of consciousness, having an identity, having a processing faculty, is its a causal nature is its qualifying feature. If it exists, it has an identity, and that's what makes it possible to be conscious. It's not the obstacle, or as Ayn Rand said, we're not blind because we have eyes, deaf because we have ears, deluded because we have a mind. It's the fact that we have this causal process. The causal process isn't an interference, as all the modern philosophers said. It's actually what makes it possible. And imagine someone had a theory of concepts where you could answer Locke and Hume and Kant directly with a theory of concepts, bypassing all this Kantian nonsense and, frankly, the history of philosophy for the last 200 years. But you see how radical it is. You see the uphill battle with selfishness or epistemology. These are revolutions on a scale that, look at, like I say, Marxists. I'll give you another example. Christians 2,000 years ago. Once more, they were simply playing into a cultural mainstream of Neoplatonism and Stoicism that just fit hand in glove with Greco-Roman society at that time. They were moving in a mystical Platonic direction.
Polytheism too, right? Because Christianity's, I mean, they might say they're
Yeah.
monotheistic, but they're polytheistic.
Well, that's it. And that's why a form of Judaism was so attractive. A non-material single God fits much more with Neoplatonism and Stoicism. And so for purely philosophical reasons, the Roman world was finding Judaism in those respects very attractive indeed. Christianity absorbs that, but opens the door to everyone, unlike Judaism. You don't have to be circumcised. Greeks, Jews, women, slaves, men, everyone can come in and be a Christian, but it also combines monotheistic intolerance with it. So while it opened the door to everybody, when it took power, it quickly moved to wipe out its competitors. But you see, it had a much easier time. It took hundreds of years for Christianity to really take over the Roman Empire, but it at least was working with the cultural mainstream of Platonic and Stoic philosophy that was dominating the Roman world at that time. By comparison, Objectivism has a far, far more challenging task in terms of gaining general cultural acceptance. Another thing Ayn Rand said that is interesting in this context, we don't need to convince everybody. We only need to convince a quality minority. Once our views become established and accepted in the mainstream, she figured the culture would be cooked. But she had a more realistic view about how long it would take because she knew how radical her ideas were.
Yeah, well, it's a very difficult task to inundate a culture with a specific philosophy, right? And it seems to me that the task was made even more difficult. And I suspect you might differ with me here, but I don't know. But her use of the word selfishness, because the objectivist use of the word selfishness is not how it's used in common parlance. It's not how it's defined in the dictionary. So when people hear it, there's an automatic pushback against it. And then you have to get into explaining, well, that's not what we mean, and this and that, where that could have been avoided. And in the beginning of The Virtue of Selfishness, she says she uses it for the same reason people are afraid of it. And I get it, but it just seems it created an unnecessary obstacle.
I do disagree. Okay. And I agree with Ayn Rand in her position that we use the term. The term is itself invalid as it's currently used. She acknowledged in the very place you were just talking about, she said, why do you use the term when everyone uses the term to mean something very different than you do, Miss Rand? And so she acknowledges that right up front. Of course, I am using this word in a way, and she said, while older dictionaries may be better, she can't find it, her definition. Now, wait a minute. Selfishness only refers to actually self-destructive behavior. So what we're looking at here is a lie in the current use of the concept. We have to take on the current use of the concept as being wrong. In other words, we have to be able to say that what you're calling selfishness is actually self-destructive. You should pick a new word. You should pick a word like whim worship or something.
Hold on, but Jim, aren't there people, because a concept, in order to form a concept, you have to identify one or two or more units, measurements omitted. My crappy definition, real quick.
I know what you're referring.
Yeah.
Citation, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology.
So My mind just doesn't work like hers. I'm thinking of one thing. I can't pivot to the other that quickly. So there are people, though, that try to pursue their own interest at the expense of others. That's what selfishness means, to pursue one's self-interest or to attempt to pursue one's interest at the expense of others. There are people that do that.
Well,
So
there are, but in
no,
fact,
so there is a legitimate concept there, is what I'm
well,
saying,
see,
because there are people that do that.
I even question that. Okay. Would we apply that in any other context? For example, I think that I'm helping your health by bleeding you like medievals did, or you're putting leeches to your body. Do we call that medicine? Oh, but their intent was medical, was medicinal. We say, no, it's pre-scientific healthcare. We say it's not healthcare. We say it's pseudo healthcare. We don't call it actual scientific medicine to leech people. That is the equivalent concept here. In other words, what you're saying is, because people think that they're pursuing their self-interest, and that's only sometimes, mind you, there are people who do sacrifice themselves, and there are people, and this is even more common, who aren't even thinking about the long term. Just the fact that someone is thinking about what is in their actual long-term self-interest is an extraordinary rare phenomenon. Until you get to that threshold, the word selfishness shouldn't even be applied. The word selfish, you say there, everyone is motivated. If what you're going to say is everyone's motivated, not everyone is a psychological egoist, though. And even those who might think that they're pursuing their self-interest by harming others are in fact wrong. They're no more doctors than those medievals who were leeching their patients.
See, just this discussion, though, in my mind, proves my point. Because if somebody sees the title of the book, The Virtue of Selfishness, right, then they don't read it. That won't happen to everybody. But enough people are turned off by it that they don't get to that stuff that you're talking about, that long, drawn out explanation. I happen to agree that the word selfish, it's poor to describe what is being described. What you're describing, like I've been, around so many criminals that attempt to pursue their own interests by, regardless of how it affects others, and they only end up destroying themselves. But there is a legitimate concept. The word may not be appropriate, but the concept is legitimate, that people do that. And
Well, you mean a contradictory pursuit of one's, a thoughtless pursuit,
sure,
an
sure, people do
irresponsible
that.
pursuit,
Sure, people do that all the time.
effective,
Yeah,
causally inefficacious pursuit
yeah,
of
but
one's.
it's legitimate that people do that.
Well, people
Regardless, I
do
mean,
well, people do that, but they're not actually pursuing their
no,
self-interest.
they're not. I agree with you 100%. The
And
problem
that's why
here,
the concept has to be taken on. Otherwise, something is being defined out of its very existence. If
well, that's
we,
what she says, Jim.
let
She
me put it
says,
this way.
unfortunately, let me just say, because she does say this, she says, unfortunately, we don't have a word for somebody pursuing their rational best interest, for somebody that's not violating other people's rights, but is still acting for their own benefit. She actually
Right.
says that, which I agree with 100%. My only point here is that by inserting that word, you create an unnecessary obstacle.
No, we challenge, and they have no. I'm going to go push back even harder here. Until a person is willing to challenge that word in their own mind, and you're right, it will pose an obstacle. Let me concede one aspect of what you're saying. Does that pose an obstacle for people picking up the book and reading it? Yeah, we're going to have a slower time. It's astonishing the number of people who've actually picked up the virtue of selfishness, given that context. But the better minds, the ones not daunted, and let me suggest that it's not merely a correlation. There's actually a causal connection between what makes someone a better mind and their willingness to pick up a book that says the virtue of selfishness. So with enough of the better minds getting it, they're taking on, at least they're beginning to, they're the ones who will take on the battle that needs to be taken on, namely the recovery of that. Now, look at all the misuses of the word selfishness. Businessmen are awful because they're being selfish. Israel is being awful because it's being selfish about in the wake of October 7th. Okay, so when people are applying the word selfishness to perfect virtue, which they do, so long as the word selfishness not only applies to the rats that you're talking about, but the term selfishness also applies to moral heroes, which it is, then the concept itself has to be recovered. The concept itself has to be addressed. Philosophers are the ones who do that. Philosophers are the ones who change or give us new concepts or alter the meaning of previous concepts. And that's what she's doing. And one of the concepts she's taking on she believed that to be the cause until people can be comfortable. And this is it. For me personally, if I had not addressed it at that emotional level where people talk about selfishness and thoroughly overcome that, I could not have been comfortable with asserting my own interests. In fact, let me suggest that Ayn Rand didn't come from a Christian background, but I did. And coming from my Christian background, I had to take on that concept that fully, that directly. For me, because Christianity so polluted my mind that I believed that saying I want was some kind of sin. Whoa, 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 whoa. You mean you're being selfish and self-assertive? And if you twist it, and Christianity, let me suggest, does twist people's minds that badly, as it twisted mine. If it's that badly twisted, we absolutely need major surgery to recover the concept of selfishness. No, your self-interest is good. That
Jim Valliant. Jim Valliant.
You see?
Offending Christian sensibilities since his teens, folks.
And that's what we need to do.
I'm with you there, 100%.
Christian and Kantian sensibilities,
okay,
or we're not going to penetrate.
So, Jim, two questions. First, I'm going to combine them because they're sort of the same thing. What do you view as obstacles to the spread of objectivism, and what are some common misconceptions about objectivism?
Well, we covered the biggest one right there.
It is. But there's others that I can think of.
Also, the way she's attacked in substance, the kind of thing is, well, Trump equals Ayn Rand.
Right.
I hear that from a lot of mainstream lefties. If you say Ayn Rand, they'll say, "Oh, you mean like Trump?"
Oh, I've heard it from so-called objectivists too.
Wow. Well, yeah, exactly. Well, there are objectivists who are so people. Now, let me be pedantically fastidious here, as I sometimes people who the word objective, the self-identification objectivism is itself something. It's too early to trust people in the use of that very concept. People can superficially give you some examples. The libertarians. Ayn Rand is going to be remembered as the dust settles of history. We can complain and accurately about the Libertarian Party. They've got so much wrong. They really don't understand objectivism. On the other hand, Ayn Rand made more than any single individual. Yeah. Ayn Rand made that movement possible. She blew on the embers to bring it to reignite classical liberalism and bring a consistent form of it into existence. And so, again, we can complain about Alan Greenspan till we're green in the face, because
green in the face,
or green in the face. I don't know. or we can positively mention Martin Anderson's role. But high-level government officials have been students of Ayn Rand.
Sure.
Tops academic scholars like Professor Edwin Locke or the aforementioned Professor Alan Godelf. So many PhDs now are objectivists and philosophy professors. Ayn Rand has made, and look at the sales of her work, or seeing comic book artists or rock bands using her idea. She might not have approved of rock, and she might not have approved of comic book. I don't know what she loved comic books. But the point is that Ayn Rand has made an indelible, whether it's things we like or things we don't like the Libertarian Party. Ayn Rand has made an indelible impression. And so I think if our civilization doesn't destroy itself and descend into another dark age, Ayn Rand will have left such an indelible impression, even though she's viciously attacked, that I think at the end of the day, objectivism, when the dust settles and people get past, beyond the personalities. Now, so I am sanguine if America remains free enough about the future of objectivism. That's a big if, I know. And that is a question of time. And I'm not sure about that answer, about that one, honestly. But you asked me what are the biggest obstacles. The biggest obstacles, I think I've already covered as well. The radical, and by far, there are a lot of people, even I'll use the word objectivist here in its proper use. There are a lot of real objectivists who I think are very unfair about other objectivists and their strategies and their tactics and how they go about it, because I think it's going to take a variety of, let me put it this way, of thinkers and a development of new ideas based on objectivism Artists, let me give you an example of that. You really know, see, if I can convey emotionally something, if I can convey a philosophical perspective in art, that now I'm really getting cultural traction, it seems to me, because now I'm sinking into people's subconsciouses, into their emotions, into the way they look at things. If you look at the Renaissance or ancient Greece and what made their art so wonderful, or 19th century French Romantic literature, what made it so wonderful, right, was an expression of a certain positive idea. And more artists are good artists are expressing the values of objectivism, if you will, that is real cultural change
Sure.
in the long run. I think artists will lead us out. Now, what are the challenges? That I do not think it's schisms. A lot of people will say, oh, well, objectivism has all these schisms.
Jim, don't get ahead of me. You always do this. You get ahead of me. You
Well, you
preempt
asked
my
what the biggest
question.
obstacles
No,
are.
I know,
Some
but I'm
people
gonna.
say,
I know, but I'm gonna get to that. But the thing is then I'm just sitting here like Joe
okay,
Donut
you're right, you're right.
because I need to comment here. See, I think a big
It's
obstacle.
your podcast,
Yeah.
after all. I do flapjaw quite a bit.
I think a big obstacle is the common perception of who Ayn Rand was, largely created by the Brandons, which, by the way, you've done an excellent job of dismantling in the book Over Your Right Shoulder. But
Okay.
nevertheless, when you read biographies of Ayn Rand, many of them, their source of information is Barbara Brandon's The Passion of Ayn Rand, Nathaniel Brandon, in his The Benefits and Hazards in Judgment Day, or people that were disaffected from the Randian movement, right? And to me, it's irrelevant. I don't care. Like, if every single word uttered by the Brandons about Ayn Rand were true, it changes nothing for me because I can read what she wrote. I don't care if she was a hypocrite. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. I care what she had to say, not what she was. Now, a lot of people don't see it that way, and they get caught up in this pop culture view of who she was. Do you also see that as an obstacle?
Well, I wouldn't have written a book if I didn't think it was a relevant topic. I did see Ayn Rand getting personally smeared. I did see that, the fact is there haven't, maybe there've been a couple of attempts at it by marginal people, but there haven't really been serious attempts at addressing Ayn Rand's ideas. There have been so many professors and PhDs now who have articulated the various parts of Ayn Rand's philosophy, from her metaphysics and epistemology, her position on God, to her meta-ethics, to her normative ethics, to her politics, all over the place, even her aesthetic understanding and her understanding of history. We've had all kinds of developments from academics that have been completely unresponded to. No answer is given. No serious philosophical answer really is out there. She remains unaddressed, largely speaking. You might have had one or two that might qualify as sort of exceptions, but that's it. That's it, Michael. So what do? They attack her personally, and I saw that dominant criticism coming from a personality attack, and it is designed to scare young people away, isn't it? She was this monster, and they lie about her. She died on welfare.
Yeah.
I mean, my God, she defended a serial killer, the Hickman guy. Even in her notes about that Hickman guy, she calls his crimes terrible and she calls him a monster, and they don't see that. And nor would they criticize, say, Truman Capote for doing in cold blood a sympathetic treatment of killers in his fiction. No, not Truman Capote, but Ayn Rand. She must have defended the serial killer, or Ayn Rand died on welfare, or or Murray Rothbard's lies. People got excommunicated because of their artistic taste. I think of the word excommunication already. Just these, Ayn Rand was, a cult leader in effect, and that's not fair either. It seems to me, because those accusations are, like I say, just mostly factually false.
Yeah.
And so, but yes, I think it's important, but I don't think that it's fatal. I do not think that's the main problem. Michael, you were not dissuaded by any of that. I was not dissuaded by any of that. I'm going to
Right.
repeat something I said earlier. The better minds, like with selfishness, The better minds aren't going to be, in fact, they're going to be, if anything, the wild criticism, the over the top criticism. She is the worst writer who ever lived. I read that too. She is such an awful person. She was a selfish, narcissistic, cruel lady. Okay, when I read that, it's like, okay, it cannot look. You're over the top so far that you're really defeating yourself. In fact, a personal attack is a confession you've lost. I don't have a substantive response, is what you're admitting when you attack someone personally. So the better minds, even more so than with selfishness, the better minds are not going to be dissuaded. And as I say, as we get historical perspective, the details of her life are going to be completely lost. True or false, the details of her life are going to be largely lost, and it's her works that will survive. So I don't think that the personal attacks, while in the short term, again, I'm going to give you an answer similar to selfishness. In the short term, people who are already corrupted by our culture will maybe not pick it up because of selfishness. Young people hearing these personal attacks might think, oh, I don't want to be judged like they're judging her. Now think of what that means about their psychology. We don't need people like that, Michael, in the movement. We need the people who can say, I don't know, this sounds like an ad hominem to me, and it sounds over the top, and that's not going to, the substance of our ideas is all that matters, like you say. And so the better minds like you and me are not going to be dissuaded by that. And those are the minds we want to attract in any event. They're the only ones who are going to make a difference in any event.
That is a great point. That is a great point about the type of minds you're going to attract. That's a really good point. Now we're going to get into some of the stuff that's going to lead to the schisms. I'm going to ask you about some of the organizations, and I want you to just briefly tell me about them and rate them. And I'm going to go back to the beginning, the Nathaniel Branden Institute. That's where I want to start. And I understand that that's largely before your time, but I know you've studied it in depth.
I've spoken to many people who were teachers and students at the Nathaniel Branden Institute in the 1960s, and they've told me about their experiences there in detail. And I think that educationally speaking, it was a very important thing. I think it was a good thing, net, in terms of getting a cadre of people educated in objectivism, at least the introduction to objectivism that was given to them. Ayn Rand approved the stuff that was taught there. And so the actual substance of what was taught was a positive thing, is the way I'd put it. Now, I think that part of the criticism of Ayn Rand that is based not on criticism of Ayn Rand, but perhaps criticism of her movement. And maybe Ayn Rand is in part responsible because she did so sanction Nathaniel Branden. I think his personal behavior, his personal interaction was a negative thing. I think that but again, the really good students there, all the teachers at NBI, in effect, apart from Nathaniel and Barbara Branden, signed on to the denunciation of Nathaniel Branden. I think they themselves knew, and they confirmed it, whether it was Peikoff or Robert Essen or you name it, name the NBI teacher back then. They had confirmed to me that Nathaniel Branden's behavior was bad. They were the main victims of it, frankly, and not good. But the idea that he could be that way, I think, was a negative, and that creates a bad association with objectivism right there. So while it was very important that there be an educational thing, and the substance of their education, I think, got objectivism off to a good start that way, and started creating a movement of students and serious thinkers of objectivism. They started there. There's no question. On the other hand, Nathaniel Branden's own behavior, but Ayn Rand, you see, got rid of him. And I think that was a healthy thing. And she closed down NBI.
Yeah.
Saying she distrusted, from the outset, she distrusted organized. It wasn't called the Ayn Rand Institute. It was called the Nathaniel Branden Institute or the Objectivism Institute or something. No, she did not want to be personally and directly associated. That's why it was called the Nathaniel Branden Institute. I think he would have preferred to have Ayn Rand's name or her philosophy's name attached to it, but Ayn Rand did not want that. And I think that was wise. She dissociated herself and she distanced herself enough that I think Branden's own behavior, again, I don't think that's going to be a long-term problem. Again, think of it. Ayn Rand's approach is revolutionary. She's entering a realm that had been, as she herself acknowledged in the introduction to the 25th anniversary edition to the Fountainhead, she is encroaching on the territory that had been the monopoly of religion since the dawn of time, in
Yeah.
effect. It is not surprising to me that people would even for all of its unfairness, it is a slander, it is unfair. Ayn Rand's movement was not really a cult. For all of Nathaniel Branden's behavior, I think cult is still an inappropriate word. On the other hand, I think that the term cult was inevitable in terms of it being applied to objectivism, because she is doing just that. She changes people's lives. She alters people's psychologies.
You know,
And when other people look on, they're going to say, oh my God, this is some kind of cult.
you
Just right there.
know, Jim, when I was incarcerated and I would have people read, and one of the authors, I'd have them read Ayn Rand or Stanton Samanow and Ludwig von Mises. And I got this reputation, like people would warn guys, don't go to, he's going to brainwash you.
Kind of
He's just going to
brainwashed.
brainwash you, especially with religious people. And they would say to me things like, oh, you just believe it because it's in print. And I would say, hold on a second. I read ideas coming from multiple, many, many, many different thinkers. You've read one book and believe every word in it, right?
Practically because it's in print.
The Bible. But I'm the one who does this. And I'm creating, then they accuse
I
me.
think that's what Freud called projection.
Yeah, you're creating clones. I'm creating clones. You belong to a religion with over 1 billion people. What are you talking about? But
And
that,
I'm putting up with all this crap for being an advocate of selfishness and being
yes,
an atheist. So here I am, this small minority out here, and you're saying I'm
yeah,
just
right.
okay.
And I'm doing
Got
the
it.
brainwashing because, like you said, when you're
Yeah,
changing the way people think or helping them to change the way they
that's
think,
it.
that comes up. Okay, you mentioned the ARI, the Ayn Rand Institute. Um, Two questions. First of all, the same question is going to come is how do you rate it? What's it about? But also, how did they come about the name Ayn Rand Institute when I believe they came after her death, when
It did.
she in the past did not want her name associated with such an organization?
Oh, they were only cooking it up the year after her death in 1983, and honestly, and the reason there were several reasons. Well, and you know, I think Ayn Rand knew that there would be such organizations after her death. She named Leonard Peikoff her heir, both her legal heir, and declared he was the first objectivist philosopher other than herself in her introduction to his first book, The Ominous Parallels. And so she knew that she had unpublished material that would likely get published. She knew that there would be educational efforts that Dr. Peikoff would want to engage in. And that was their goal. It's a primarily pedagogical, educational institution. They run essay contests for high school students and junior high school students for Anthem, high school students for the Fountainhead, college students, Atlas Shrugged. They have educational programs morphed now. They have the Objectivist Graduate Center. Now it's morphed into Ayn Rand University, in effect, at the Ayn Rand Institute. And they have been producing all kinds of wonderful intellectuals and thinkers. The graduates of their programs and those essay contests give some college money to students to further their education. And some really good students have been produced, some really good minds. They are pumping out, their educational activities have pumped out so many bright people who really, really understand objectivism. And that's what I'm going to praise ARI for. They, more than any other institution that has ever tried to educate the world on Ayn Rand's philosophy, do the best job of actually explaining Ayn Rand's philosophy and are truest to objectivism out there. And they're doing an amazing job of educating people about it. And they run the Ayn Rand archives, of course, where Ayn Rand's letters, journals, notes, memorabilia can all be found and need to be preserved for posterity. And so Leonard has, in effect, given the Ayn Rand archives, once the material that he wanted published in book form, he gave it to the archives so that it could be accessible to all scholars. And there it is today. And so in those educational functions, I think the Ayn Rand Institute is doing an important job. They're doing a really good job. They're faithful to her ideas, for sure. But there's only so much even they can do. Yeah,
Sure.
but I think they do a good job, and I think they are faithful to objectivism. I myself am not affiliated with ARI. I prefer an independent status, and the funny thing is that I have spoken with Leonard Peikoff about my independent status, and he approves. So I think he even understands that what we're going to need is a lot of different independent voices. People going, for example, to different publishers, like I did with my book, or people uh, uh, doing their, I mean, when it's anyone else, it's not really Ayn Rand, but everyone putting it into their own words is going to be its own thing. And it needs a lot of that. It needs, I think we need more autobiography. That's one of the reasons why I really love your book of you from a cage. And I really want everyone out there, if you haven't seen it, check it out. It is an amazing read. And I think that more objectivists need to do that, come forth and tell how objectivism helped them change their life. I've read now autobiographical statements from gays who are objectivists. Now it's interesting, right? Ayn Rand wasn't, she didn't have nice things at one point to say. I mean, it was just an off the cuff remark. I don't think you can conclude anything from that one off the cuff remark,
Yeah,
which is basically
but
her
Jim,
own
but
aesthetic.
speaking of fundamentals, right?
Right,
This is why I don't care what she says off the cuff or what she did, because
right.
objectivism is not consistent with banning gays or disliking
Of
gays.
course
The
not. And even
fundamentals of the philosophy go a different route, right?
absolutely. But you see, these by having a story about a young gay person coming out and his struggles, and how Ayn Rand's philosophy helped get him through that, how it was a philosophy of reason, individualism, being your own person, standing up for yourself, standing up for your own values. Yeah, I get to be me. Howard Rourke was an inspiration to homosexuals. Okay, that makes a great story. That it tells a very important part of what I said earlier. You know, if we're going to be accused of being a cult because we're changing lives, then what we need are statements from people like you or other people saying, no, 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 no. It changed my life, but in a really positive way and a good way. And I recommend to other people in my context, you might find the same kind of value here. I think that is absolutely. I tell people about my background as a Christian and how I ended up writing a book critical of Christianity
Right.
because it was Ayn Rand who liberated my mind from Christianity. And so I need to tell my story, in effect. And thank you for that last interview we did, because I think those stories really do concretize and put flesh on the benevolence of objectivism, as opposed to, hey, she's just brainwashing people and altering their lives. No, she's giving them a value that really helped them in a positive way become their own person.
Sure.
And that's the story told. It's not a cult at all, is it? It's a fostering of individualism and their uniqueness as an individual. That's why I pick stories like Christians or homosexuals or someone in prison. Those people are coming from a different context than objectivism, and they're
I'd like to see you get those three into
I know.
get it into one concept: Christians, homosexuals, and people from prison. What could
It is an unusual election. On the other hand,
an eclectic bunch?
right. Well, there are all kinds of ways in which individuals vary, and whether it's a
Sure.
negative thing like Christianity, or having the criminal mentality that doesn't mind violating someone else's rights. Now, Christians and criminals need reform. Homosexuals and people who are often, ostracized by their families or something, although there's nothing wrong there, they need sometimes the psychological support that Ayn Rand can give, the
Sure.
epistemological and ethical support that Ayn Rand can give. So that's what I mean by the importance of autobiography and memoir at
Sure.
this stage in our movement. Uh,
Okay. The Objective Standard Institute.
I have published an article in the Objective Standard. This was several years ago, before the famous divisions between certain people at ARI and Craig
Jim, you're
Biddle.
getting ahead of me again.
Oh,
Hold on with the schisms. Each in its turn.
I know many people who work for the Objective Standard Institute and go and teach at their conferences. I consider many of them old friends, and guess what? They do excellent work. And when it's excellent work, it's excellent work. If they're doing stuff that I think is valuable, I'm going to say it's valuable. And just because there is some personality dispute, and I can't know the details of that for myself. I do believe that ARI is the most consistent to objectivism. On the other hand, the objective standard people, the Prometheus people, there's another organization associated with the same group of people. I think that they can do really, really good work. They can do really, really good work. I think it's less even quality than the quality of work that you get at the Ayn Rand Institute. And I can't give any background information on what causes those people to be in conflict with people at
But
ARI.
is that Jim? I don't want to use the word fair. The comparison, because ARI is an academic organization largely, right?
Yeah.
Where
Yes.
it's high level philosophy. I don't know much
Yes.
about the Objective Standard Institute, but I have seen some writings,
Oh,
and it's
you
more,
froze.
it seems,
Did
targeted
I freeze?
toward. No, you're good.
You froze.
Yes, you froze, but it's okay if you froze as long as
Yeah.
I can hear you. I've been getting some instability in my connection. But am I right that the Objective Standard Institute is more directed toward a popular audience than is ARI? Because it seems to me it is, from what I've seen, which is not a lot.
I missed a good deal of what you said. You froze there.
Okay. Is the Objective Standard Institute more directed toward a popular audience than that of the ARI?
I would say so, yes.
Okay, because that's because what I was saying is it doesn't seem like while I'm asking you to compare, I'm just saying that comparing them on the level of academic contributions would not be fair in that sense because
Well,
that's not what they're doing.
well, yeah. I mean, ARI does have the Tara Smiths and Robert Mayhews and the Greg
Yeah.
Salisburys. They had Alan Gotthelf
Yeah.
and Locke and these really impressive academics. Yeah, ARI focuses on that, and their job is to help PhDs and people who want to teach the philosophy. So they are focused academically and educationally. You're absolutely correct. And I would say that the objective standard folks are trying for a much broader appeal, and they are go into, and the objective standard itself as a magazine goes into issues, uh, they'll publish a memoir from a homosexual objectivist and who explains why objectivism saved his life. That's the kind of thing you will read and see. I think that is valuable.
Yeah.
So what I'm
Each
going to
has
say
its part, right? Like,
exactly. So I'll say to you, insofar as they do stuff like that, I absolutely think that's a value. I'm not going to diss a more popular call that they're sending out, but I also will make the distinction that, yeah, if you're looking for exact, objectivism proper, go check. They may be a bunch of PhDs who are going to give you a big technical lecture on objectivism, but that's where you're going to find objectivism, in my view.
okay, now for the Atlas Society.
You will not find objectivism then. I had a friend years ago who called them the objective-ish. And truly, they are objective-ish at best. Now, the founder, David Kelly, he got his PhD at Princeton. He was a student of Leonard Peikoff's. He taught at objectivist conferences before he broke with Leonard Peikoff. But his attack on Leonard Peikoff and ARI, in effect, Truth and Toleration, and then the legacy of something about the legacy of Ayn Rand. David Kelly misstates objectivism flat out. He gets fact and the relationship between fact and values wrong. Now, I like his book on the evidence of the senses. I like his work on the theory of abstraction. But when it comes to fact and value, he is all screwed up. And as a result of that, as a direct result of his view of fact and value, he has a view of moral toleration and what we would call sanctioning of evil that led directly to the Atlas Society sanctioning evil. They embraced Nathaniel Branden. They embraced Barbara Branden. They invited them to their conferences, and they have this broad view where people who are opponents, hostile to objectivism, can come in and they'll promote their work. I have to say I totally differ with the Atlas Society. I think they're a negative. They're a net negative in terms of the influence because, in effect, they mislead people about objectivism and they help out things that hurt objectivism, like Nathaniel and Barbara Brandon, as you pointed out. You're absolutely right. Biographies of Ayn Rand, whether it's Ann Heller's or all these various biographies that have come out recently, are all completely dependent on the Brandons and maybe other reports by Murray Rothbard. You and I know that that's not a credible source or set of sources, and yet the Atlas Society promotes people like the Brandons, the late Brandons, or they can't pollute it anymore. They're both passed away, but it tells you something, I think, about the Atlas Society that
as an organization. Now,
yeah.
now let me just say this, right? I don't disagree with what you're saying about the Atlas Society as an organization. I will say this. I've had interactions with Jennifer Grossman, who is the head of it. She's been very nice to me. Seems like a very nice person. I have nothing against her. And I also think they have some very good minds over there, at least in the persons of Robert Drzynski and Steve Kelly. I'm not going to sanction their view of objectivism as an open system. I don't believe it is. But Stephen Kelly's work on postmodernism, I find to be phenomenal. And Robert Drzynski, who I've had on the show when he was discussing Israel, was right on point. And I think he's a very bright guy. As a whole, I agree with you on the organization because I think that the open objectivism idea is wrong.
You don't mean Stephen Kelly, you mean Stephen
Hicks.
Hicks.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Yes, I messed up the whole thing. Okay,
So
let me
I like
rewind.
Stephen Hicks' work on postmodernism. I do.
Stephen Hicks on postmodernism.
And I disagree with Hicks and Kelly about the open system like you do. But on the other hand, can they produce work that has some value? Of course. But you're asking me to rate them. I'm going to rate people that. And let me go further though. You mentioned Grossman. This idea of Christian outreach is
it's misbegotten
altogether.
Yeah, I agree.
Christianity is the opposite of objectivism. The opposite. There is no common ground.
Right.
There is no common ground. Ayn Rand, with her principled view of things and her view of blacks and whites, would be very clear about this. And I think the Atlas Society totally betrays Ayn Rand's, what anyone could know would be Ayn Rand's own intentions in this kind of regard. I have to say. So Atlas Society, while there may be people who are associated there who produce valuable work, that's accidental and incidental. The organization is fundamentally corrupt and is giving people the wrong idea about objectivism in multiple ways.
Okay, now for my question about schisms. Now, as you mentioned, the Objective Standard Institute and the Ayn Rand Institute are both adherents to objectivism as objectivism is. Well, I don't know. I haven't read everything. I haven't read everything by every person, but I know as organizations, they're for objectivism. But yet there's a schism there. Then there's the schism between ARI and the Atlas Society, which is more understandable because it's more fundamental. But you and I actually had you and I had a debate about this. I don't know, maybe a year ago. I don't know, and you won the debate. You were right, and that's why I want to ask you about this, because my thinking was that these schisms are harmful in objectivism in particular, and in the liberty movement more broadly. And you made an excellent case for why no, schisms are not harmful; they're actually beneficial. Why? Why are schisms beneficial? Because it's so counterintuitive.
It does seem counterintuitive. If we could see solidarity, if we could be a united front. The idea goes, we could be much stronger. We would be bigger in numbers if we could count the heads and be united. Well, if what you're doing is counting heads and wanting a unified front, you're already not grasping how early it is. Ayn Rand says it's earlier than you think in a famous refer back to her urging patience on the part of her students who are very excited about the prospects of her philosophy. No, it's earlier than you think. And if you think that it's our numbers at this point that are going to make the difference, or our solidarity at this point that's going to make the difference, you are way earlier than you think. That's way earlier than you think. We are not significant in our numbers to even make that kind of a difference, it seems to me. On the other hand, look at the history of schisms in movements that the movements I've already mentioned, Christianity and Marxism, let's say. If you were to go in a time machine 125 years into the past, and you would see all the differences between the socialists, communists, and you've got anarcho-syndicalists, you've got Edward Bernstein revisionist Marxists, you've got, oh my goodness, all the different breaks and schisms, and they hated each other. The only thing worse than a damn bourgeois capitalist was that other guy, that socialist I just had a break with. Okay, so commies were famous and socialists were famous at the turn of the 20th century for being all over the map on things and just having strong disagreements. It was the things that they got the whole world to agree with them about is important. It's not Karl Marx, is it? It's how other people through transmission belts got Marxist ideas into the system. It had nothing, it was not harmed by the schisms within Marxism that were there. It dominated the 20th century, socialism. So you tell me schisms are a bad sign? No. Christianity. If you were going to go, now let's go even further back in history. If you go back to the second century, let's say, of the Common Era, way back at the start of the Christian movement, you would see Gnostic Christians, Marcionite Christians, Arian Christians. Later, there would be, the number of variants. By the time in the second and third centuries of the Common Era, there was a variety of Christianities, is the only way to really put it. There is a mainline Christianity that, when it became the religion of the Roman Empire, became the Orthodox version, the canonical version that wiped out all these other ideas as heretical. But if you were to look in those 2 centuries at the varieties of Christianity and consider the varieties of Christianity since then, did that prevent Christianity from totally dominating the philosophical and cultural world of Europe for the last 1800 years?
Not at all.
Not at all. In fact, the divisions, let me say something about the divisions. They show that people really care. They really give a crap. And if I wasn't going to get all, hey, Michael, I think you formulated it wrong. Okay, that shows me someone who's super motivated about getting it exactly right, which tells me we're talking about some of the most rigorous minds, some of the most demanding minds, some of the minds that are on a moral crusade and aren't going to, okay, those are people morally motivated and demanding intellectually, aren't they? And those are 2 signs of a very powerful movement. In fact, those are the things that are the indicators, the very things that cause schisms are the very indicators that would suggest to me that what we're looking at is a group of very morally committed, intellectually demanding people, just the sort of people who could be poised to take over the world.
Okay, so now for my very last question. I want you to put on your Nostradamus hat, and I want you to tell me what you think the future holds for the objectivist movement. I know you can't know, but your sense, what do you think?
I can't know. Yogi Berra, the famous baseball philosopher, said it right. Predictions are hard, especially about the future. And this human being thing, wow, these humans can be really
right.
Anyway.
And 20 years from now, somebody might show up. I remember you said this, Jim Valliant, and you were wrong. You made this prediction.
So I first want to start by saying no one can predict the future. I do not claim any magical prescience. And I do believe in free will, in fact. So like I say, when it comes to human beings, we have to be particularly cautious about our predictions. Anyway, I think the way I said it earlier is the best I can do if we remain free, if we don't collapse into a total dictatorship or dark age, which is possible. And that's the thing. Objectivism is precisely what informs me that that is possible. In many ways, the world today is better than it's ever been, ever in human history. Really, really, truly.
Sure.
And there's no doubt. But in other ways, as Ayn Rand pointed out, 70 years ago, 60 years ago, 50 years ago, Ayn Rand was pointing out very disturbing things, and that made her a prophet, in my view. She saw the racial tribalism growing, the balkanization. She saw the growth of environmental people in those days thought environmentalism was just about, having not littering and having a clean park or something. And Ayn Rand says, no, 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 no. These people are anti-technology. They're anti-reason. They're anti-civilization. This is what I mean. And of course, Ayn Rand proved to be precise. The last 50, 60 years have demonstrated just how prescient she was on issues of that sort. And so in a fundamental cultural way, the world is going to hell in a handbasket. And really the question is, can we catch it in time before we reach critical mass and even America falls into a dictatorship, say? We're heading in that direction. I see both parties. When I was young, when I was a little kid, the Democrats seemed to represent opposition to censorship, free speech. They seemed to represent opposition to the Vietnam War. They were for peace. They were not, eager for America to be out there, trying to change the world militarily. On the other hand, the Republicans at least gave lip service to capitalism and the free market. Today we have Donald Trump as advocating tariffs, advocating job boning the Fed when he was president for zero interest rates and stuff like that. No, whatever superficial defense of capitalism the right once had is gone. And whatever superficial defense of free speech the left once had is gone, is gone. They want hate speech laws. They want, and so I think there's a fascist convergence going on in the major parties. That concerns me. It dramatically concerns me that America is heading inexorably, perhaps in some ways faster than I once thought, in some ways slower than I once thought, but still inexorably, no matter which party is in power, the federal government gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. There's more and more and more regulations. There's more and more and more implicit censorship. There's more and more oppression. And there will come a critical mass where America forgets altogether its liberal roots. I see that happening. Now, short of falling into the chasm of dictatorship or some new dark age, if America remains free and prosperous enough to survive, then I think it's almost inevitable. And here I'm going to go out on a limb. If America does avoid a dictatorship, say, over the next several decades, I think it's inevitable that objectivism will catch hold. I think it has reality on its side. I think it has reason on its side. And I think all other things being equal, free people, a comparatively free people, with a comparatively free society, reason tends to win. Now, I know that's a tendency, but I think the ideas are so powerful. And you felt that in your own soul. I've felt that in my own soul. In our own ability to look at the world and make sense of it. Once you see something true and fundamental, it's impossible to unsee it. And I think that we're making enough headway that if we just keep going at this steady pace, objectivism will, if America remains free, reach a critical mass and inevitably will catch hold and at least get that significant minority that Ayn Rand thought was critical to it having a real influence on the culture. I don't think I will live to see that. I don't even think my sister's children will live to see that, maybe. But I think at some point, if we do remain free, it will happen, and objectivism will become a dominating force, or at least an important force in not only America, but world culture. Yoram Brooks said something recently that I really agree with, and you and I both participate in the Ayn Rand Center UK. There's all kinds of signs that an international objectivist movement, and we can only really say this in the 21st century. I mean, back in the 20th century, when I would visit Europe and I would say something like Ayn Rand, they would have no idea what I was talking about. My international friends were completely ignorant of Ayn Rand. Today, in the 21st century, we're developing an international objectivist movement. Serious students of objectivism from all over the world, from Australia to India to Israel to Scandinavia to Great Britain to South America. And when we make penetration like that, on that scale, again, Ayn Rand it's one of those, she's made an indelible impression, like I said earlier, on the culture. Her novels, her movement, even the things that we disagree with, where people have been influenced by her. She has so left a mark and a footprint that even where it's a mistake, people have to look back historically. They won't be able to evade the historical splash, let me put it that way, that Ayn Rand made, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. All right, Jim. Thank you very much. Now, where can people find you?
Well, I've already plugged, here, gosh, Michael is, I don't know what possesses him, but he has me on regularly. So you can find me here. But also, I do regular podcasts for the Ayn Rand Center UK. And I have written a book, Critical of Christianity, as I said. We have a website, www.creatingchrist.com. I do a lot of podcasts in the history of religion world, where there's history of religion podcasts. And I am on Facebook, and now I'm on X. It's mostly Facebook, although I am on X, as I say, and I'm on social media answering questions, whether it's about objectivism or about the origins of Christianity and religion, every day practically. So if you want to ask me a question, hit me up with that. Come find me on Facebook. I manage a couple of pages over there, the Ayn Rand page, Leonard Peikoff Study and Appreciation page, the Roman Providence of Christianity page. And so if you want to ask me about any of those things, come on over to Facebook. I answer questions almost every day.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank
All
you,
right.
sir.
For now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. I'm Michael Liebowitz. Remember, I'd like to see you like this episode. I'd like to see you comment on this episode. I'd like to see you share this episode. And I'd like to see you subscribe to the podcast. Till next time.